If you can't use a chat, you can just interrupt me. But I want to welcome Dr. George Rutherford yet again, who's been, as many of you have said, our own personal Dr. Fauci. And we thank you so much, George, for joining us this morning. And we're so glad to have you with us. So we'll take the questions as they come in the chat box there. But why don't you start by telling us your concerns about the holidays approaching?
I mean, so I hate to be a sort of a Debbie Downer on this this happy day, but this pandemic is wildly out of control in the United States. Wildly out of control. There have been more than 100,000 cases a day. We're now having more than 1,000 deaths a day. That's like 3 747s crashing every day. And I think you have to, really wrap your heads around the fact that we're rapidly approaching the same number of battle casualties from World War II, from more deaths from this virus. And it's no wonder that at least 51% of the population felt that enough was enough. Now, this thing is so far out of control, it's going to take a long time to get it back under control. And the vaccine's part of it, but it's not everything. And I think that, my message to everybody is avoiding infection is in your hands, and just do it. So I could give you the usual public health advice around Thanksgiving about not baking the turkey inside, the stuffing inside the turkey, and making sure you wash the cutting boards after you've cut up giblets and stuff like that. But we're not talking about salmonella today. And I've been answering questions about Halloween and Thanksgiving since August. This is a time where families come together who come from across the country, and as Christmas and New Year's as well. And my advice is don't do it. Resist the temptation. This is not a normal time at all. And given at least the few gray hairs I see on the screen here in front of me, including mine, this is not the crowd that can walk away from exposure and do well. And right now we think in the United States that aside from a few choice rallies in the last week, that much of the transmission is going on in small family gatherings. So this is exactly what you don't want to do. So my advice is, first of all, don't do it. Stay home, buy yourself a chicken, or if there are 2 or 3 of you, buy yourself a capon or the smallest piece of turkey you can get, and have a virtual Thanksgiving. If you are going to go to a place, or not a restaurant, but if you're going to go to somebody's house, like one of your kids' house, you want to, what I tell people is that make sure you're going to have it out there. Now we're mitigating, right? So the basic prevention message is just don't do it. Now to mitigate it, there are several things you can do if you're going. First of all, have it outside. I can tell you from personal experience, there are no more space heaters to be had from Home Depot, so you might want to think about ordering one online. The second thing is if you have 3 families that are coming together from different places, and by different places I mean they don't live with you, have 3 tables. Serve the plates in the kitchen so people aren't congregating at a buffet table or passing things around. It's not the time to do the father or the bride thing, like bouncing around from table to table and spilling everybody's drinks. It's, this is a time to be separate. Okay. I would also encourage you, and I couldn't be more serious about this, to take advantage of home delivery services for food. You don't want to be in the grocery store on Wednesday. Okay. Just don't do it. And by all means, just forget about Black Friday. If there were ever a good day for all of you to sit home and watch football games, that would be it. This is the first time that football becomes protective from a public health standpoint, but avoid that sort of stuff. So it's all about minimizing your exposure to people whom you don't live with. And unfortunately, that's just the way it is. Now, I've been talking to any number of people who have kids coming home from college and they want to, get together with their elderly relatives and stuff like that. It's like, And so there actually is some advice around testing and quarantining and things like that. But, that stuff's not foolproof. And, you especially have to be, it depends on where people are coming from. There are very few places that have almost no transmission now. So if you have relatives coming from the South Island of New Zealand, go for it. If you have the kids coming home from college from Northwestern or University of Wisconsin, bad idea, seriously bad idea. That right now in parts of, I heard this yesterday, it was like Indiana maybe, something like 55% of all tests are positive. So 1 in every 2 people who gets tested has a positive test. Here in San Francisco, it's 0.7%. I don't know what it is in Alameda off the top of my head, but it's like 1 point something. So you have these huge gradients of infection, and that's something that you need to be avoiding. So is that what you wanted? Is that the cheery news you wanted me to tell you?
The truth shall set us free.
Yeah.
There are some questions off to the side here. Is it safe to be in an indoor space where people wear a mask only when they are closer than 6 feet to others? Examples being people sitting in cubicles 6 feet apart, not wearing a mask, or as a salesperson talking off the mask when taking off the mask when customers are not close by.
I think that's probably, I think you're flirting with disaster. I mean, you could construct this that say, oh, well, okay, yeah, you've mitigated your risk by 50%. But depending on where you are, again, depending on where you are and what the background prevalence of the infection is, it's and there's other variables in here around ventilation and things like that we have to concern ourselves with.
And what about testing? There's a couple of questions here about testing. How you would integrate that with enhancing your pod or
right.
seeing relatives.
So remember what I said first? Yeah. Don't do it. Okay. Now we're getting into the down plan B. So if you're going to test people to have them enter the pod, your closed group, they need to be tested twice, and they need to be tested with a real polymerase chain reaction test, not an antigen test. That's how the White House managed to have a super spreader outbreak in the Rose Garden. And I would say that because of the dynamics of the infection, if you're exposed on day 0, you turn positive on day 3. So if you catch people in days 0, 1, and 2 after exposure, they're going to have negative tests. Those aren't false negatives; they're true negatives. The virus hasn't replicated to a level yet where you can detect it. So I've been telling people that you should be tested. So I have a daughter at the University of Virginia who thankfully is not coming home for Thanksgiving. She heard me about this, but she is going to come home for about 6 weeks. And I said, you have to be tested before you leave, and it has to be negative. Okay, if it's positive, have a nice Christmas in Virginia. When you get here, you're going to be separated from everybody else until you can get another positive test. And ideally, that cadence would be about 3 days apart. And we did this before when she came home at, like in the end of the school year last year. And I think it's, the testing's pretty available now, but you don't want antigen testing. Nobody will do antibody testing for you. And you want, real PCR tests. Those are the kinds that are mostly available. But if you start hearing words like point of care and rapid test, those tests aren't nearly as sensitive. And given the amount of gray hair I'm seeing here across the screen, you don't want some cheesy test. You want the real thing. You want it as accurate as possible.
Okay. There was a question here about best place to get updates on areas of the countries and get accurate information.
New York Times.
Okay.
That's what I get it. That's where I get it every day. Now, if you want to drill down in different pieces of Alameda County, you have to, it gets a little bit more complicated. But the New York Times provides state by state and county by county data every day. That's updated daily. The Los Angeles Times also provides data on the proportion of people, proportion of tests. No, it's actually the proportion of people who test positive in the prior day by county. So those are actually good sites. And then the Chronicle does some stuff a little bit more locally. But because the rates are relatively low here in the Bay Area, there's a fair amount of fluctuation, and it's sort of hard to follow day to day.
Question about safely seeing grandchildren.
Yeah, how old? Are we talking 2-year-olds or are we talking 22-year-olds?
Susan? Susan Pierpoint, you want to unmute yourself and clarify?
They are ages almost 2 and almost 3.
Okay, fine. Just don't babysit them, okay? That's the one thing. The Swiss government, this is great. The Swiss government issued a directive that it was all right for grandchildren to hug their grandparents. So I thought that was sort of charming. There's a few charming things that have happened. The other charming thing was that the Prime Minister of New Zealand, who has a young child, she sent a letter, not email, a letter to every child under 7 in New Zealand saying that she had deemed the Easter Bunny an essential worker, and you don't have to worry about not getting stuff on Easter. So it's like, imagine the multiculturalism that that invokes. So yeah, I mean, children are less likely to get infected. They're less likely to transmit. And as long as you're not getting in their faces, you're probably okay. And there's a lot of physiology behind why children are less likely to get infected and less likely to transmit. But a lot of it has to do with the fact they're short, so. And you can make that go away by getting down in their face. You lose your height advantage, towering over them. But I have a 2-year-old granddaughter, and I see her all the time. But I wear a mask when I'm around her, and glasses.
Speaking of masks, there's a couple of questions here about what masks you recommend.
I have my stash here of all the things I don't recommend. I just use surgical masks. You can buy them, the blue surgical masks. Those are the best. If you want logo wear, you can have, something like this, which has the wires, right? And this actually has a filter on the inside of it. You can change if you have more filters. This was an African one that somebody sent me. These are fine. They're 2-ply, right? But what you want to make sure of is that they have a piece of metal at the top so it'll fit over your nose, okay? Having a mask on like this doesn't do anything except make you look stupid, right? The other masks are so-called N95s, which is what we used in the hospitals, in the ICUs. This is not the kind to get. See how it has this nozzle at the end? That means you are completely exhaust your breath. So it protects you, but it doesn't protect anyone around you. These are for construction where there's a lot of dust, and so you can buy these at Home Depot and stuff. But the trick here, if you're going to insist, if you only have these N95s to wear, and I suggest people wear N95s when they travel on airlines if they can get their hands on them, wear a surgical mask underneath it. Then you're protecting other people, and you get a higher level of protection for yourself, and you can still breathe more or less. The bandanas are better than that, folded over, so you want 2-ply. And gaiters, as long as they're 2-ply, work okay as well. Although watching the football games, nobody seems to be able to keep their gaiters on. They're always pulled down and below their nose and stuff, and that's not a good thing. You need to have them on for them to work. Go ahead, Scott. Got another one?
There's another one about testing availability.
It's going to be you mean across the holidays? There'll be plenty.
Is there, what do you recommend about that? I mean, where do you begin?
It depends on what kind of health insurance you have, like everything else in the United States, right? So if you have Kaiser, you can just call Kaiser up and tell them you want a test. If they tell you you don't need one, tell them you have a cold and you work in a nursing home. That'll get their attention. They'll skip you to the top of the list in about 2 seconds. So, you can buy there's commercial places you can get. So Verily and Color Labs have sites around, but there's no point in paying top dollar if you can get your insurance to pay for it.
And our doctors, some people have said in the chat that they don't get the doctor approval for it.
Well, you can go down and get it yourself then. But it's crazy. Everybody should just approve. I mean, that's not the rule. That's not helpful to not approve it.
Okay.
What about Susie's question?
Which one's that? Sorry.
Would you say that people that work in healthcare with PPE should consider themselves to be more or less risky than others?
I hesitate to tell you my story. I guess I better not. So my wife works at Children's Hospital and insists on going to work every day. No, I don't think that, it's not like you have to strip off all your clothes in the entry hall and get in a betadine shower. This isn't Ebola, right? I mean, and I've worked with Ebola, so I know of what I speak here. No, I mean, I think people who are in direct patient care, in intensive care with patients who are known to have COVID, who may have COVID.
Like my daughters.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, they need to follow their hospital protocols for how you change, how you put your gown on, how you take your gown off, how you take your masks off, all that stuff. Our experience at UCSF, when we see healthcare workers who are infected, they've typically infected each other in the lunchroom. When they take all their stuff off and then, sit around and chit chat and eat sandwiches. Okay. I mean, I'm being a little flip about it, but that's that's a scenario that's not good. And so I don't see them at particular risk if they're following protocols, because they basically make them change their clothes at the hospitals. Right. I don't see them as being at particularly higher risk.
Okay, good.
George, just to add to that, part of my question was, should I consider myself as a healthcare worker riskier for other people to be around?
What do you do exactly?
I work in hospice, so I go to.
So you're in direct
homes.
contact with patients?
Yes.
And how often are you tested?
It depends. Once a month at the minimum, once a week at the maximum.
More. I mean, first of all, I mean, if this is a home hospice, I take it.
Home and nursing home.
Oh, so you got to be really careful around nursing homes. Really careful. And that's one of the things we've done well in Northern California, is to some extent keep COVID out of nursing homes, although there have been outbreaks.
A lot of them are locked down.
Yeah, well, that's good. But the vectors into them are the people who work there, not the visitors. And so it's one of these things where you probably need a higher cadence of testing. And I would say, somebody who's actually going in and out of nursing homes, depending on the type of test you get, again, if you're getting antigen testing, these rapid antigen tests,
No.
you should be tested 3 times a week. If you're getting PCRs, I'd say you probably need to be tested twice a week.
Wow.
And
Okay.
and wear PPE and do all that stuff.
What about teachers? There's a question here about that.
So in Los Angeles County, all the teachers are getting tested, and they're going to be tested at some sort of regular basis, and I think it's twice a week. And that's with a rapid PCR test, a qualitative PCR test, as opposed to a quantitative one. There's a company called Summer Bio that's in Berkeley that's doing this, and they have sort of they have the ability to do lots of tests at once. So I think some of the school districts coming back are going to want the teachers tested once. Some are probably going to want them tested on a more frequent basis. And I frankly can't remember what Piedmont's doing. I heard it the other day. It's at least once before they come back in. If you're a teacher, you need to be you need to understand what the districts are doing around precautions and around preventive behaviors. And you're going to be, you got to make sure everybody has masks on. I would encourage as much ventilation as possible up to and including teaching school outside, which happened, by the way, in both Boston and New York in the 1918-1919 flu pandemic, where, and I have pictures of kids, with 3 pairs of mittens on trying to write stuff, but that's how you get that's real ventilation. You want the rooms to be almost, you want them to be as miserable as possible, frankly, because then you're sure that there's enough air coming in and out of them. So everybody has to wear masks. I'd suggest that teachers wear, depending on what the age is. Again, if it's a difference between pre-K and 12th grade. The pre-K ones, you could probably, if you wear glasses, that's probably good enough. Although what we do at UCSF when we see patients wear safety glasses, with the things on the side, you could do that too. You could wear a face shield. Face shields are fine, but they don't substitute for masks. You have to have masks and a face shield, or masks and glasses. That's the ticket there.
There's a question here about doing grocery shopping. You'd mentioned that earlier.
I was specifically referring to the Wednesday before Thanksgiving.
Okay, but could you kind of clarify that a little bit more? Your concern there is just the being packed in and long lines and
yeah. I mean, that's what you want. That's exactly the kind of thing you want to avoid is density. And so we go, what my wife and I do is go to Trader Joe's Old Folks Hours on Sunday morning at 8. And, I'm sick of Trader Joe's food, but it's plenty convenient. And it's actually all been restocked overnight. So that's all good too. And it works out, I think, pretty well. And people there are of a certain vintage and are actually pretty careful. So I think that's how I deal with it. Or you could just have stuff delivered.
Ben had a question about choirs and when and what that might look like as far as being able to find some way to sing at some point along the way.
Yeah, very dangerous, very dangerous. And it's one of those things that the state is prohibiting. It is prohibiting right now any kind of, whether it's in a church or a cabaret or concerts or whatever. The problem with singing is that you get forceful exhalation and you can send the virus out farther. And there have been some colossal disasters around choirs with mortality. So my advice is don't push it. Sit tight. Let's wait till we get vaccines. Let's wait till we get this under control and then come back and talk about it then. I think one of these things where you see these things where people are so clever and you can have a bunch of people singing at the same time virtually. Fine. I've even seen one where the same person sings 4 different parts and then puts them back all together. But this is not the thing to push on.
So my daughter has a comment about, she lives in the UK and she's on with us this morning. Just about the different ways the countries are dealing with the virus. Yeah,
well, I'm amazed that the UK can't deal with it as a single country and has to deal with it as 4 different countries. So, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and England are all doing different things or have done them at different times. mean, part of it is that public health in the United States is basically the province of states, and that's kind of a constitutional issue. And you see how well that's worked. I mean, you guys are lucky that we live in California, where people actually understand about public health and have gone way out of our ways to protect you. In other places where they're more interested in the economy, the mortality rates are astronomically high. I can tell you, in San Francisco, the city of San Francisco, during the 1918-1919 influenza pandemic, they're really the only thing we have to compare this with. There were 3,000 deaths by the end of it. 3,000. Right now, there are 140. And the city's 2.5 times bigger than it was in 1918. That's the difference, right? That's what difference these measures have made. And I'm sorry that the pubs can't stay open longer, Christina, but there's always the telly and the beebs, so you got your two choices there.
I may have been missing some of these questions as they've streamed in here. Is anyone want to speak up and ask one of your questions?
I have one, Scott. This is Laura. I can turn on my video. Hi, Dr. Rutherford. Thanks for this. I just have a quick question. I've got really young kids. They're almost 3 and almost 6, and we are sending them to daycare right now.
Right.
They're in separate pods, a kindergarten one and a separate one. And I'm just wondering if there are any indicators you would watch for. Like, I've been looking at positivity rates. Anything we should look for in terms of if it goes above this level, we should pull them from daycare, especially given
I mean, I think no, not really. I think that those are really helpful for socialization, and those kids are so young, and their chances of them transmitting to each other are so low that I wouldn't worry about it too much. Now, if one of the teachers gets sick, which is what happens in these daycare outbreaks, is that one teacher gets sick and comes to work anyway. Unfortunately, that's when you got to get them out of Dodge. But somebody else will close the place before you even know it.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
George, can you give us a little update on the vaccine progress?
Sure. So there are 3 vaccines in advanced trials and several more in trials, probably 7 total in trials. There are 2 vaccines that are in general use right now. One that's only limited to the Chinese military, and the other that is in Russia. So that's, if you want to get a vaccine, you either have to join the People's Liberation Army or move to Russia. I would suggest not getting either of those, by the way. The 2 that are Pfizer has one, and a company called Moderna that's worked with NIH has one, that are messenger RNA vaccines. And so what they're doing is injecting a little bit of RNA that gets taken up by your cells, and it cranks out proteins that look like the spike protein that sticks off the end of the virus. That's what attaches to the cells. Those things are, I think we're probably going to see one of those approved by FDA in the next 3 weeks, I would guess. Now then the question comes, who gets it first? And these are federal investments, so the federal government gets to make choices. And all the vaccines that we're talking about now are 2 doses, one 21 days apart and the other 28 days apart. We'll see how that goes, but it's basically going to be limited to people who's like the healthcare workers who are actually taking care of patients, people who work in nursing homes, nursing home residents, and then what we have learned to call essential workers without really defining the term. The federal government's also going to rake a whole bunch off the top for the armed forces. And part of that is around preparedness, and part of it is that the Navy's had huge outbreaks on ships that have put them out of commission for weeks on end. So, I mean, that's whatever, right? So we'll see how this goes. There should be more vaccines, another big dollop coming out in January, and we may actually have a 3rd vaccine approved by them which is a different vaccine that's made by AstraZeneca with Oxford University. And that's the one that's been stopped a few times for adverse events in people in the trials. So, we'll see how that one goes. The problem with the two mRNA vaccines, messenger RNA vaccines, is that they have to be refrigerated at minus 70 degrees centigrade. Now, I'm sure you have a minus 70 degrees centigrade freezer in your garage, but you'll be the only person in the universe who has one if you do. These things are really just at research universities, and the logistics of getting that, it can be defrosted for 2 days, 48 hours, and kept on dry ice, right? So, so this is, there are a lot of logistics issues of moving this thing out. And one of the things that the current administration has done a good job of is to kind of think through logistics of distributing these vaccines. So, as they roll out, the other thing is that they've been manufacturing all these vaccines in parallel with the trials. So usually you wait till the trials are over and you know whether it works or not before you invest in manufacturing. But these have been done as parallel processes. So as soon as a vaccine is approved, it can go right out. It can start being used because they'll have enough. They'll have several million doses available. So that's the kind of current thing. Look for it. Look for it soon. Again, older people are probably going to be in the second wave of vaccinees. We'll have to see what essential worker means. We'll have to see what healthcare worker means too, because, I think I'm a healthcare worker. I have a license. I see patients occasionally. Now, admittedly, it's all on United Airlines, so it's not going to quite count. But I won't get vaccinated in the first wave. I won't get vaccinated until the second wave, I'm pretty sure. Does that help you? Do you have any other questions about the vaccines? Okay.
This isn't about vaccines, Doctor, but I was wondering, you were talking about your daughter coming home for Christmas and how you're managing that.
Yeah.
And testing there, if she's positive, she stays home. She stays there.
Yeah.
Then she comes over, quarantine for a few days, and get another test. What does that quarantine look like? When we talk about quarantining, or what does that actually look like? Can they be in the house with a mask?
Yeah, but they have to, they have to be separate, right?
Yeah.
It means you're not eating together. You're not watching TV together. They have to be in a separate room. And, that's not to say they can't go out and walk around the block, but, you're not doing stuff together. They're separate.
George,
you don't want to take chances here. I mean, you just don't want to take chances.
George, this is Lila Green. I thank you so much for this. My son just flew in from New York because my husband died. His father died. And we're waiting for the test results from his COVID test. Mm-hmm. He has to fly back to New York. He's a substitute teacher. They have a quarantine rule there. You have to be tested before you go. You have to be tested after you land, and you have to quarantine in between. The testing sites I'm seeing there, you get your test results in 3 to 5 days. Mm-hmm. He needs to have a test within 3 days of flying, or has to have a test negative before flying in order for that test to qualify. Are mm-hmm. any of the shorter testing results, the tests that give you results in 24 hours, are any of them good?
Yeah, they're good enough for these purposes because usually you get retested. So the one to ask about are so-called LAMP tests. LAMP is an acronym for something. Okay. I actually know what it's an acronym for, but and I can't remember the trade names. I'm sorry, but yeah, and those can actually be done at point of care, and you can get results quickly. But you probably have to go to like some private medical, thing, or doc in the box kind of deal to get them, I would imagine.
There is a place in Milpitas that gives these kind of tests, but it's really expensive. It's like $250 a pop.
Yeah.
If you have Kaiser, Lila, they are doing PCR tests really fast if you're in the higher group. if you have a reason for it.
Yeah, and
Okay.
difficulty is we're dealing with New York health insurance.
I've put up on the chat a way to get a COVID test in, I think it's in Hayward. And you just Google this, you find what I wrote on the chat.
Okay.
Dr. Rutherford, my wife and I are both in our 70s, and our grandson lives with full time. And he goes to high school. He's 15, and the high school wants to very likely start in person. Comment.
Trouble. Yeah, difficult time. Difficult. I mean, he needs to wear a mask. He needs to be religious about wearing a mask. And he, you know, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. There's a lot of social pressure around high schools, obviously, and it's not about on the campus because they're going to enforce it on the campus, but it's when they leave the campus. I think you got to be really careful, and you should be in the first tranche of people who gets vaccine too. Whether you can pull it off or not is another issue.
I had a question. I think there's a lot of people who have like medical risk factors, and so I have asthma.
No,
and
no
so
more than 65% of the population. Yeah, okay.
But you know, I think it's hard to figure out like what's okay to do. And for my own life, I mean, we're pretty sheltered, and sometimes I wonder if we're too sheltered. I mean, we kind of don't do things if we don't have to take advantage of delivery. But you know, among my peer group, people I think have a more interesting happening life, and I'm just wondering if I've kind of ratcheted things down too much.
Are you alive still? You know, what do you want me to say? Go out and take some chances. It's, you know, it's not you. You're not the one who's crazy. You know, it's the people you're comparing yourself to. Now, but by more interesting, you mean they go out and walk and, you know, walk to the store and.
No, I mean they're like going into their indoor dining, outdoor dining, travel.
You know, that outdoor dining doesn't bother me very much. I think that's, as long as it's spread out, that doesn't really bother me. You go early, go get the Applebee's special, you know. That doesn't bother me much. I mean, we go out maybe once a week now, you know, but it's all plenty controlled, and it's pretty distanced, and I feel pretty comfortable with it.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Sure.
Dr. Rutherford?
Yeah.
So I'm a nurse, and I want to ask you about masks, specifically N95.
Right.
It is radiation actually, if I take that mask off and I hang it for, say, an hour, does that actually kill any of the virus?
Depends on where you hang it.
I mean, outside in the sun.
Outside in the sun, it would kill off a lot of it.
So the efficacy of the problem is those N95 masks lose their seal after 5 uses or 1 use.
Yeah, no, it's like after a few days, and faster if they get wet. You know, you just have to have a steady supply of them.
So is there any advantage putting a cloth mask over an N95 mask?
No.
None. Zero. Okay.
These are fit tested N95s. These are the real thing. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. No.
Okay. And
Not
I have
belt and suspenders. Yeah.
and I have to say one thing regarding when I go into an environment where I see it's unsafe, and I think maybe the general question for everybody. If I see people, that crowded environment you're talking, the distance in a store or whatever, or I see somebody pulling their mask down because my tendency is now to just walk out of there.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that people have a problem doing is analyzing a situation, because we're all taking risks all the time at some point, and you have to know what that risk for yourself is. I don't know how else to say that, because you brought up so many different important aspects here.
Yeah, when I see those situations, I turn around and walk out. I'm not interested. And we had to take we had to stop in Truckee for gas the other day. We were driving my mother-in-law to the middle of Nevada. And I said, oh, let's just run in here and get a sandwich. And it was like, oh, it was sociopath city, right? And it was, just turned around and walked out, I should have guessed it from all the Raiders paraphernalia on the windows, but I have a niece who's an assistant DA in San Mateo County, and I said, "How do you get out of jury duty?" She said, "Wear a Raiders jersey." He'll be gone like that.
George, what are the prospects for a quick at-home saliva test type of reasonably sensitive test?
Not bad. Not bad. I mean, there are two things. There's home collection and home testing.
I'm
right?
talking about home testing. The
I'd say
15
that's
minute.
a few months off. It'll be colorimetric. It's meant to be like a pregnancy test that you can, you get it's a color change on a strip. But that's a little ways away, and that's not going to be all that accurate, and unless they can engineer it better.
George,
go ahead, Mike.
With things being so bad as they are in the country now, do you have any sense in terms of a timeline or just what lies ahead? In any way, shape, or form, given experience over the years with other situations?
Sure. Well, I mean, nobody really has any experience with anything like this since 1918. I think 2021 will be a transitional year, and I think things will be relatively back to normal by 2022. That's barring any new mutations. I don't know if you guys have heard about the mink farms in Denmark. That's all about trying to wipe out a mutation. And so, it's that sort of stuff. People are going to really have to be on top of this stuff and it's going to take a lot of cooperation in order to stay ahead of the game. But I think 2021 will be a transitional year. We'll be able to do some things and not others. And then I think 2022 things will be pretty much back to normal. But I can also tell you that if you want a good deal on a cruise, they're giving them away now. CDC just put out new rules about cruise lines. So anyway, you heard it.
The only problem is you have to stay outside the entire time of the cruise.
Yeah, like on the Titanic, staying on the bow.
Well, George, you have been more than generous with your time today, and I am so grateful for this. What a privilege we have to have you in the congregation and willing to do this, because I know this advice is so helpful to all of us who remain concerned and sometimes pretty anxious about what's happening and how to handle our own lives. So I'm really grateful to you and for taking this time with us.
So my advice, just to come back to it one more time, is take it easy. Don't push the envelope. Okay, just be cool.
Cool. And also with you. Okay.
The new benediction.
Thank you again.
Everybody puts their sunglasses on and go out into the world and be cool. Right?
That's right.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank
Aviators.
Good luck. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, George. Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot. Take good care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Scott. That was great.
Thank you for making that possible, Scott.
Absolutely.
I'm sure he